Cool. Welcome, everybody. I see you still have some people coming in. It's great to see you all. Welcome to another I2 seminar. It's my great pleasure to introduce Ekena Pinagé. She is a Brazilian geospatial scientist. We share a number of common interests. She's been doing some pretty transformative studies of the Amazon basin using geospatial techniques. She's about to defend her PhD at the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia. And she's, I understand that her defense is going to be next week. So I'm excited for her. So almost Dr. Ekena Pinagé. She's also a visiting scholar here close by at OSU in the College of Forestry. And she's looking for new opportunities in Oregon. And I'm excited to welcome her. And I encourage you to stick around at the end to ask questions if you have them. And let's welcome Ekena for her talk.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lucas. Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. Okay, so thanks everyone for being here, spending your lunchtime with me. And also thank you for the organizers of the seminar. So my name is Ekena Rangel Pinagé. I'm a PhD candidate at UTS and visiting student at OSU. My supervisor at UTS is Professor Alfredo Ruete, and my co-supervisor here at OSU is David Bell. My talk will be about the highlights of my PhD thesis, which is about structure and function in degraded tropical forests from multi-source remote sensing. Very quickly about the agenda for the talk today. I have one short slide about me and my background, then a general research background of my thesis. Then I'll give the highlights of my 3 research chapters. First one is about phenology and forest degradation. Second is about structure and productivity in degraded forests. And third one will be about evapotranspiration in structure in degraded forests. And then the final considerations of the talk. So as Lucas said, I'm originally from Brazil. I have a bachelor degree in geography from the University of Brasilia. Then I worked for WWF Brazil for a couple of years in topics about landscape ecology and conservation biology. Then after that, I moved to the Brazilian Forest Service, where I actually started working with remote sensing, and it was very interesting there. I helped to implement the monitoring system of the forest concessions in Brazil that they were starting at the time. I implemented the remote sensing monitoring component of the monitoring. And in the meantime, I also did my master's in forest sciences, taking advantage of the rich material that I had at the forest concessions to do research. Then after the Forest Service, I moved to Embrapa, which is the Brazilian company for agricultural research. And I stayed there as a research fellow working in an international cooperation program with degraded forests and LiDAR data in the Amazon. And this period that Embrapa actually provided the seeds for my PhD research. Then I moved to Australia and started the PhD in sciences. It's a very generic term. It's in forest science, I would say, but the degree is in forest sciences. Sorry, the degree is PhD in sciences. And also I have a joint period at OSU, and now I'm finishing the PhD, ready for the next steps of the career. Moving about the general research background of my talk. I'm working on the Amazon. The Amazon is the Amazon covers 9 countries in South America, and it's the largest and most biodiverse tropical forest in the world. It holds nearly 50% of the tropical forest carbon stocks, and it exerts a large influence on South America rainfall patterns. But anthropogenic disturbances have been threatening the stability of the carbon stocks and the rainfall regime on the Amazon. And when we say about anthropogenic disturbance, we're talking mainly about deforestation and forest degradation. And it's important to distinguish between those two. So deforestation is clear cut, complete removal of the forest cover, while and also deforestation implies a different change in land cover. So it goes to crops or pastures or urban or anything like that. And while forest degradation is only partial removal of the forest cover, and the forest is still considered a forest. And my PhD topic is about degraded forests and their responses to disturbances. And the two main agents of forest degradation in the Amazon are selective logging and fires. And it's important also to highlight that selective logging is considered degradation because from an ecological perspective, it has impacts over the forest, but reduced impact logging in the Amazon, it's a critical mechanism for the sustainable development of the region. These two main agents, selective logging and fires, are the two main agents of degradation in the Amazon. And selective logging has a diffuse pattern of, just a second, make an adjustment to my screen. Selective logging has a diffuse pattern of a diffuse pattern of canopy damage with low magnitude canopy damage, while fires has great and widespread canopy damage. As we can see here in this time series of images, the spatial and temporal dynamics of logging over time. And here also from the ground perspective, we see that fires have much larger impact on the canopy. At degraded forest, ecological process from both regeneration or succession and old growth forests, they take place at the same time. For example, we can see here on this degraded forest picture, we see upper canopy trees, we see regenerating subcanopy, as well standing dead trees, which is an evidence of previous burns. So while this increased ecological variability posed additional challenge for ecological studies, these forests, they also provide unique opportunities to observe integrated forest responses to disturbances. And then in this context, the broad research questions for my thesis are, what are the functional and structural linkages in degraded forests? And also, does forest structure mediate forest responses to disturbance? And then to address these research questions, I'll be using mainly remote sensing techniques. And there are different remote sensing approaches to address forest function and forest structure based mainly on the interaction of the wavelengths, different wavelengths with the surface elements. So for to assess forest function and elements of functions such as evapotranspiration, phenology, and productivity, optical and thermal remote sense are more adequate, as they provide direct observations of surface reflectance, solar-induced fluorescence, and land surface temperature. And on top of these direct observations, they can also provide optical and thermal remote sensing, provide input for models so from these models we can extract also variables such as evapotranspiration and gross primary productivity. And then to assess forest structure and elements of forest structure such as leaf area, canopy height, and vertical foliage distribution, radar and LiDAR remote sensing are more adequate as they interact with the three-dimensional structure of the forest. Then we can extract leaf area index, canopy height, and vertical foliage profiles from LiDAR and radar data. So now jumping into the chapters, the first one is about the effects of forest degradation on phenology. So phenology as the changes in vegetation in response to the climatic drivers is a key component of forest function, and it's a sensitive indicator of the interactions between the forest and the climate. And the seasonal patterns in tropical forests are driven by environmental factors, mainly radiation and precipitation. But these patterns are also mediated by biological factors such as structure, physiology, that go from the leaf to the canopy scale. Specifically, the Amazon forests, they green up in the dry season, meaning that they have the peak green as in the dry season. For example, in this picture in the bottom, we can see the profiles for radiation and leaf area index. They are coupled with each other, peaking in the end of the dry season, and they are decoupled with precipitation patterns. And this happens most at the regional scale because mostly the Amazon region is it's not water limited. It rains enough there, so radiation is sometimes the main limitant for vegetation activity. And in the dry season, we have less cloud and consequently less radiation reaching the canopy. So the research question for this chapter is, what are the effects of logging and fires in phenology patterns in the Amazon? The remote sensing data that I'm using here are two vegetation indices, enhanced vegetation index, EVI, and normalized burn ratio. Each of those, because they have important characteristics. EVI is important for tracking vegetation greenness, and NVI is important for tracking disturbances. My study areas for this chapter are Feliz Natal here in the southern and drier Amazon, and Paragominas in the eastern Amazon. These areas, they have intense land use dynamics. As you can see, these gray polygons represent deforestation in those areas. They both hold evergreen forests, and although they have similar annual precipitation, when we look at the monthly distribution, we can see that in the dry season, as described by the red line here, the dry season in Feliz Natal is much more severe than in Paragominas. We have 2 months with nearly no precipitation, and this seasonal pattern of precipitation is also expected to have a strong effect on vegetation activity. The workflow for this chapter, I used MODIS at 250 meters resolution. I would use the MODIS time series from 22 to 2014, and then I extract the time series of EVI and NBR. For the disturbance mapping, I used an existing fire product based on MODIS. I also mapped selective logging based on Landsat images because of the scale of the type of disturbance that selective logging does. It's not detectable in MODIS. Then I also used the deforestation mask to exclude deforested areas. And from these products, I got the disturbance polygons for the 2 most burned years during this period of the time series. And then for this, from these disturbance polygons, I defined 4 treatments: once burned areas, twice burned, logged, and intact forests as the baseline. And then for the phenology analysis, I used techniques to extract consistent time series from the vegetation indices, and then aggregated those to have the pre and post disturbance seasonal profiles for each of the treatments. And here, looking at these effects of disturbance on the trajectory of the vegetation indices, On the left here, we have the drier site. On the right, we have the wetter site. And we are looking at EVI per day of the year. And then also we have intact forest at the green line. We have the pre-disturbance as continuous lines and the post-disturbance in dashed lines. And the colors are blue for logging, once burned, in orange, and red for twice burned. It's we can see that for EVI in Feliz Natal, it's very seasonal compared to the wetter site, and the lines, the profiles, they mostly converge in the wet season. And then when we come to the dry season, the pre-disturbance and logged, they stay high, they follow that green up pattern the end of the dry season, while the post-disturbance burning lines, they stay low. They don't keep up with the other lines. And while in Paragominas, in the wet season, the burned areas, they have even higher EVI, and they converge pretty much to the end of the dry season. Then when we look at NBR, the other vegetation index, NBR provides different information from compared to EVI. We have less seasonality in NBR, but one interesting aspect is that we have year-round differences in burn areas for the two sites. And it seems that these two indices, they describe complementary features of vegetation responses to disturbance, with EVI responding to the water stress of the dry season, while NBR showing year-round differences. And one hypothesis that I have for this result is that this you can see here in this picture the effect of multiple burns in forests. The species composition is very different. So we have pioneer vegetation, shallow-rooted pioneer vegetation, that they can present high photosynthesis rate when there is available enough water, but when it comes to the end of the dry season, only large trees with deep roots will be able to have water supply to green up, while these most disturbed areas would not keep low vegetation activity. So this is the second chapter, the relationship about structure and productivity across intact and degraded forests in the Amazon. Here, this chapter, I'm looking at the role of forest structural complexity. And it's been shown in the literature that structural complexity is a key factor for has a positive relationship with productivity. So the complex forests are more optimized to acquire light and assimilate carbon. And tropical forest degradation in form of selective logging and fires alters forest structure and function, and these agents, they may impair the forest's ability to harvest light for photosynthesis. So at this chapter, I'll be looking at the solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence, which is a byproduct in the photosynthesis process. Excuse me. And it has an advantage that it's a remote sensing product, that it's a direct measure it's not, it shows linear correlations of photosynthesis and GPP, so it will be a direct proxy for GPP, while GPP is based on models. Another advantage of SIF is that it's sensitive to canopy properties and also to heat and water stress, and that we think that it might capture differences in productivity between intact and degraded forests. So the questions for this chapter are how does vertical forest structure and leaf area index vary as a function of disturbance history? Also, does SIF vary as a function of disturbance history? And lastly, what are the structural predictors of SIF emissions? The remote sensing data that I used for this chapter are airborne LiDAR data, small footprint discrete return LiDAR, and SIF through POMI. The study area for this chapter, I'm looking at the drier site at Southern Amazon, at Feliz Natal only. And here we also have a slightly different sample design for the disturbance polygons. I'm looking I mapped over Landsat images, I mapped 3 categories of logging and 3 categories of burned forest based on the time since disturbance, and also intact forests as the baseline. The workflow, so I classified the airborne LiDAR transects based on the disturbance history into one of those 7 treatments, and then I got LiDAR metrics and vertical profiles for each of them, and also I used CFI through POMI data at a very coarse resolution, 5.5 kilometers. Although it's coarse, but it's the finest CIF data available. I extracted the seasonal profiles about 1.5 years of CIF data for each of those disturbance treatments as well. And for the last question about the structural predictors of CIF, I used a much smaller sample size because we need to have paired observations of LiDAR and CIF. So I used only CIF pixels overlapping the transects, and within 3 broad classes only for intact, logged, and burned. And I used the LiDAR metrics as predictors of CIF, and I fitted 4 models with 4, let's say, broad structure categories. A matrix describing canopy height, foliar distribution, horizontal and vertical heterogeneity. And these figures in the bottom, they show examples of how I established the samples for LiDAR transects of intact forest and burned forest. Because this is a very coarse pixel, I just picked homogeneous CIF pixels with homogeneous in terms of land use, just one class of the pixels, so you make sure you would have specific responses for just that class. So for the first question, what are the effects of effect of disturbance on forest structure? I'm showing here some canopy height models. They are a great visual to explain the differences. So these canopy height models, it's like as if you're seeing the forest from above, from an airplane, and we are seeing the height of the trees. So the brighter, the yellow ones are the taller trees, while the darker tones are for the tall, lower, or even the ground. So we see that burned fires, they have a lot of impact on forest height. Logged also has impact, especially for the recent ones, but they are much more localized. And for the density plots for each of the treatments, we can take the green line as a reference of intact forest, a nice curve here, and then we can compare the other treatments in blue tones for burned and in hot tones for, blue tones for logging and hot burns for burn. And we see that logging has a little bit of shift, especially here with high, more dense understory, but that burnings have presented the largest shifts compared to intact forest in terms of canopy height. So this is from above perspective. And here, while here we're looking from above, here we are looking at the vertical distribution of these of the foliage in these forests. Here we are looking at the leaf area density in each of the layers of the canopy height. And here we're looking at logged forests compared to the green in intact, and here looking at burned. Even the vertical distribution of these forest logging is very similar, fairly similar to intact forest, the shape of the vertical distribution, while when we look at burnings, even for the oldest burnings, there is still a lot of difference in terms of the arrangements of the foliage compared to an intact forest. You can even see that the forest gaining height over time in burned forest. And here the figure on the right shows the leaf area index on each of these treatments. And in this case, from LiDAR data, the leaf area is basically the sum of these leaf area density per height layer. In the leaf area index, we also see the effects of time system disturbance. We also see that burns, fires have a larger impact than logging. But it highlights that it's important to look at the vertical structure of the forest, because, for example, the oldest burns, they have no significant differences compared to intact in terms of LAI, but if you look for the figure for the left, the structure of the forest is completely different. For the question 2, what's the effect of SIF on, effect of disturbance on SIF? We are looking at the seasonal profiles of each disturbed treatment. So we have from March of 2018 to September 2019, and the shaded area are the dry seasons. And then we have the intact forest profiles as a comparison. So at least for SIF at this coarse resolution, we don't see much difference in the shape of the profiles, and also the timing of the peak is very similar. And the only thing that we can highlight from these seasonal profiles is that the most recent burns in the dry season, they are consistently lower than intact forests. For the third question about which structural attributes are better predictors of SIF, so we fitted these models from these 4 categories, and the model with LiDAR metrics from canopy height provided the best estimate. We have an adjusted R-square of 0.44, and it's important to mention that when I say canopy height, it's not the top of canopy height. Here I'm talking about metrics that describe elements of a height in the entire profile. So from this model, the model selected excuse me, selected 4 variables: the mean mean height of the LiDAR returns, standard deviation of LiDAR returns, standard deviation of the 25th percentile, and from the 95th percentile. And these metrics are very they show pretty well. I think the inclusion of the percentile metrics, they tell us something about the disturbance that are in this forest, because the 25th percentile tells us about the understory density, and the 95th percentile tells us about the top of canopy height. And as we could say, for burned forest, the understory composition is very different, and for logged forests, mostly what is changed is the top of the canopy. And one aspect that came out also from this modeling is that there is one single predictor of SIF, which is the standard deviation of the vertical foliage profile that I showed you in the previous slides, which is the distribution of the foliage across the forest vertical profile. Only this variable explains alone 22% of SIF. So that highlights the importance of structural complexity in productivity. And finally, when I plotted the predicted versus observed SIF values, especially let's focus on this one, which was from the best model for the canopy height metrics. One thing that came out is that the burned forests, they show the highest SIF values, and this may seem counterintuitive from the previous slide of the SIF profile, where we saw the recent burns with lower SIF. But when I looked at these forests, the age of these burns, they were older burns except for this lower point. And it seems that as these forests recover, they're showing higher SIF, higher even than intact and logged forests. And then let's see. So this was for the second. Moving on to the third chapter, which is about evapotranspiration and forest structure in disturbed and intact forest in the Amazon. Pause. So evapotranspiration is a key variable that connects the water and carbon cycles. And radiation and land surface temperature, or LST, they are the main drivers of ET. But while radiation doesn't change at small temporal and spatial scales, LST is ideal to capture fine and temporal dynamics in land surface process control in ET. And as land use changes affect the forest structure, and consequently it will change also net radiation and ET patterns. For instance, for reductions in the context of the Amazon, reductions in the canopy cover from deforestation and for forest degradation will change the heat partitioning, will have more sensible heating and less evapotranspiration, and of course this has a large impact on that. This is what causes deterioration in rainfall regimes in the Amazon region. And then for the research questions for this chapter are: how does evapotranspiration and land surface temperature vary across disturbance treatments and across seasons? And does ET vary with structural properties of the canopy? For the remote sensing data for this chapter that I use, we are going on a finer scale now, because structure changes on a finer scale than productivity, for example, spatial scale, I mean. So we are going to Landsat data. I used ET and LST from Landsat and forest structure from JEDI. JEDI is a recently launched orbital full waveform LiDAR data that was launched by NASA last year. So we have data starting from 2019, and it has a great advantage that it has much larger coverage than the LiDAR transects that are very limited in coverage. Then the study area for this chapter, I'm looking at Feliz Natal, the drier site again. And here I included additional treatments as crops and pastures, as to include boundary disturbances of conditions, and also secondary forests of different ages, to be in the middle of crops and pastures and the other degraded and intact forest categories as intermediate condition. Then the workflow, for this each of the treatments, I extracted ET and LST for the wet and dry seasons, because as ET is highly influenced by climate, so we expect differences on the wet and dry season as well. Although it's a wet and dry season, but it's from a single date of one in the dry and a single date in the wet season. And then for the relationship between ET and forest structure, I'm using three variables from JEDI: plant area index, which is JEDI proxy for LAI. I'm using canopy cover and canopy height. And here I'm not taking the multi-season approach, because structure we don't expect it to change very much across seasons. And then I try to assess the relationship between ET and forest structure. So this slide shows the seasonal differences in ET-LST, and they are ordered according to a continuum of disturbance from intact forest here to the most intensely disturbed land uses such as crops and pastures. So we have intact, the log, the burn, secondary, and crops and pastures. We can see that land use has a very large impact on ET-LST. ET from the wet season is higher than from the dry season. And LST shows an opposite pattern inversely correlated with ET in the least disturbed sites, such as intact, that has lower LST compared to crops and pastures. So they're inversely correlated. And another important aspect that, at least for the forest classes which are most interested, the dry season produces more difference between those classes, which converges to the results of the phenology chapter when we saw burned forests showing lower greening seasons in the greening levels in the dry season. Yeah, so that's it for this, I guess, for this slide. Then when analyzing the relationship between ET and forest structure across the treatments, here we're looking at the distribution of the GEDI variables, and I collapsed the log, the burn, and secondary forests of different ages into broad classes. And I also excluded crops and pastures in this analysis because I'm not interested in structure of crops and pastures at this time. So we see that for plant area index, canopy cover, and canopy height, the distribution for second forests are skewed towards the lower end, and for intact forests are skewed towards the upper end, while logged and burned, they are relatively well distributed. So it is that structure, this is not new, but structure is highly responsible to disturbance. And then when we look at the relationship between these structural variables and ET, there are some interesting facts that stand out. We see that for the least disturbed treatment as intact and logged forest, there isn't much variation in ET, regardless of the structure conditions. So structure doesn't explain much of ET on these less disturbed areas. And then when we go to the burned and secondary forest, we see that there is much more slope in the regression lines. For example, canopy cover explains 24% of ET in burned forests, and canopy height explains 23% of ET in secondary forests. And also, the regression lines are separate in the lower end. It seems that in forests that are not so tall or doesn't have much of the canopy cover or low plant area index, the variability in canopy in forest function as described by ET is much larger. And then when we go to the higher ends of structure, we see these lines, they are converging, so ET doesn't change much at the higher ends of structure. Jumping to the conclusions, at a regional scale, fires showed a much larger impact on forest structure and function in the selective logging. So we looked at solar induced fluorescence emissions, we looked at phenology and ET, and all of these aspects fires showed much more impact on forest than logging. Fire disturbance altered phenological cycles during the study period from 22 to 2014. The recovery of structure and functioning after disturbances is decoupled. We see that functioning in several of the aspects that we analyzed, they were functioning recovered that have a few years, while structure takes much more time. Of course, species composition has a lot to do with this. And changes in forest vertical structure caused by disturbance, for example, as suggested by the inclusion of the standard deviation metric on the CIF as a predictor of CIF, the best predictor. So these vertical changes in vertical structure may be playing an important role on these recovering forests. The compositional turnover may explain both the phenological shifts and the higher CIF in burned areas. Because recovering forests, especially after fires, they may experience dramatic changes in species composition. And those early succession, they are shallow rooted, and if they are dominant, these forests become water limited earlier in the dry season. And in addition to this, these species, they are fast growing, they show high light use efficiency, and they promote less canopy shadow. For example, if you look at this picture here on the right, this is a forest burned multiple times. We see a completed loss of forest structure, but this kind of canopy after a few years after burn will most likely produce a higher CIF and higher CIF values than intact forest with so little shade. And then, of course, root depth is a key trait on this process. Forests that are able to access water deeper in the soil will have more success in going through the water stress in the dry season. And also the variability of forest function in degraded forests seems to be mediated by a structure, as we saw for the last part of ET in structure analysis. And as these forests age or recover from disturbance, forest structure seems to have less influence in functioning. Yeah, I think so. This is all I had to show for now, and thank you very much, and I'm happy to talk with you guys.
Thank you, Ekena. It was a great talk. I wish you could hear the claps. I'm sure everybody's clapping at home there. Does anybody have questions? Should we jump onto the questions phase before we take a break and resume our conversation later?
I know it's a lot of information, so if you guys want details or specifics on any part, I'm happy to.
We do have a question here in the chat from Monica.
Mm-hmm.
Why there is a difference in EVI and NBR results, especially in the wetter areas? That is the first part of her question.
Mm-hmm. So let's come back to that slide.
Continue that. If you don't mind reminding us what EVI is measuring, what NBR is measuring, that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so EVI is measuring greenness or how green the forest is at that point. And greenness is, although these forests, they are evergreen, they have at the canopy or regional level, they have evergreen canopies. There is a lot of leaf turnover. For example, leaf flush when these forests start to get more radiation in the dry season. So we get new leaves coming out with higher photosynthetic capacity. So basically, and this is a very seasonal process. So that's why EVI is showing this high seasonality. While NBR, it also includes the near infrared band, which will show a little bit of vegetation photosynthetic capacity, but it includes a band that is very affected by water content on the canopy. And when you have disturbance, you have a lot of dead vegetation or ash and charcoal from the burnings, and which decreases the water content from the canopy and the forest in general. And this kind of thing, it's not seasonal like the leaf flush.
I see.
So it recovers with time, but it doesn't have a seasonal response like EVI. So basically. So
I guess this gets to her final part of the question here. Which one do you think would be better to analyze disturbance? I guess that would depend on the kind of disturbance, right?
Yeah, and depends on what's your question. So for detecting, that's the kind of the question we thought when we were designing the chapter. For detecting the disturbances, NVI is very clear. When you look, I didn't show here, but when you look the entire time series, NVI has a clear drop, especially for fires. You see clear drop, while EVI doesn't show much. So for detecting disturbances, definitely NVR. But then to phenology, also I didn't show here, but this chapter also includes computation of those phenology metrics, such as start of the greening season, peak, and end of the greening season. So for this key vegetation activity episodes, EVI is better because it follows the greenness patterns, while NVR doesn't respond very much to this.
Very cool, very cool. So NVR would get to constraining what the areas were affected, and EVI will get more to the function. So a question that I have related to that is how difficult it is to get this data from in an area that is covered by clouds much of the year. How do you deal with interference from things like cloud cover?
Yeah, when we deal with the Amazon, that's always an issue. It's hard, and we also need to implement additional steps. For example, the BRDF correction, it's to remove the effect of sun angle in the time series, and all of this decrease the amount of data. But for the wetter site, it was much more challenging because it has much more cloud coverage, but the areas we're looking were pretty large. So of course, the amount of data we had for the weather site to average across was much slower, but we still had something. But I mean, I deal with the averaging thing. That's what helped us for the wetter side. For the dry side, that was not such an issue. But the one thing that for example, that we've seen that we don't have the profiles of the weather side, they are not very consistent. They have larger, especially in the wet season, they have larger confidence intervals, and that's due to this noise due to clouds. So we average a lot of stuff that probably is confounding.
Just a quick one to follow up on that. Can you give us a sense of how much data we're talking about? Is this a big data problem? Is this you're dealing with a lot of different data sets, right? And you're bringing them together.
Yeah, different resolutions and so on. So for this, it's about 5 million hectares, each of these study sites. So they're pretty large. And for the MODIS, I had 228 images for the entire time series. It's not that much.
Okay.
For example, if we're looking at these sites for Landsat, then it will be much more data, from 250 resolution to the 30 meters resolution. But this is something that I processed. For example, I didn't need a high performance computer. I did it on my notebook, so it was doable with a MODIS resolution.
Cool, thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, I have a question. Thank you for your talk. I have a more like practical question. Do you usually average your pixels, or do you use like maximum values, or how do you go around working with that many pixels and just having like one single trend?
What you mean for this plotter here? We're looking here.
Yes.
Yeah, I average across each of the disturbance polygons. So I had, let's say, 100 disturbance polygon for each treatment. It varied a little bit, but in the about 100. So I averaged across polygons, and one thing that I tested and made a difference, I used the median instead of the mean. Especially for the weather side, because we had a lot of, although I applied the mass cloud, but we still have contaminated data from atmospheric interference. So, and then if I use the mean, I would have a lot of the data biased towards the low values. So basically using the mean helped me to get a more consistent time series. Did I address your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, can I have a question? I wrote it in the chat, but it was probably missed. So this is more of a general question. It seems that remote sensing technology and also the way you presented it is much more advanced for characterizing vegetation remotely, and I can see definitely the reasons for that being in the nature of things. I wonder what's the state of the field for remotely characterizing the, say, the animalial component of your forest, which clearly have an importance. So what's the state of the field, and are you using any technologies like based on heat sensing or bioacoustics or anything that you can use to efficiently characterize the animal sort of diversity or biomass?
Animal biomass. Well, that's not my field pretty much, but I have a colleague that worked with me named Rafa that she did a very interesting work with LiDAR data and bioacoustics. So she connected the forest structure from LiDAR, and then she put those recorders of animal noises in the forest for a while, and then she was able to find relationships between species and habits of the species with connected to different environments on the forest structure. This is all I know. At least that's something that's connected to my topic. Yeah, I don't know much about animal research.
All right, thanks.
Hi, Ekena. Thanks for your talk. I have a question about, in general, in this region, do people plant native trees to recover from fire?
No, I don't think. As the land use in this region is very complex. So most of these fires, they come from private properties, and sometimes the fire that got out of control and then escaped from intact forests. So there isn't much regeneration programs in this forest, and I guess that the secondary forests, they're kind of abandoned, and as like, you know, there's a lot of rain, and the dynamics of the succession in this forest is very quick. But I don't think people would plant unless in specific sites, probably on research sites that they were testing this kind of approach. But that's not the most common thing. Usually for the regenerating areas, they're just abandoned if they are not used. But most of the burned areas, they are used lately for agriculture.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of people talking about reforestation now, though, with the new changes in the political landscape and the story.
Yeah, especially that's a hot topic now in Brazil, and how things are going pretty bad, by the way.
Yeah, good change. Yeah, I have one more here for you, and I'm just curious, if you were to start again, if you're starting your PhD right now, what is the thing you would do differently? What is the one or two things you would, think twice about using or add to the large amount of data you already have? What is the main conceptual or technical difference that you would implement if you're beginning this now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would care more about an integrated research design, because I look at different aspects of forest function, and I thought, but like for example, the design of the disturbance treatments are different across the different chapters, so they are not directly comparable. So I think that I would care more about the whole design of the thing.
Very cool. I can see that. It was a great talk, though. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm sure everybody else did too. So why don't we take a break? We can grab some water or coffee there, and we come back in maybe 5 to 10 minutes to continue our conversation. Those of you who can stick around, please do. We're going to be just chatting more informally about the state of the field and then things to do after a PhD.
Okay.
Sounds good. See you in a bit.
See you soon.